It's a great game, snooker, isn't it? Fabulous, frustrating, but a great game.
If you look at players in general, if you go to the clubs and you see players playing, and they play 2 or 3 times a week, some longer periods than others, and they play all their life, Chris, and they never improve. And they're trying to play snooker. Now, snooker is such a complex game. There are millions of shots, when all you have to do is to learn to cue correctly, to wield the cue, point it where you're looking. And there are certain basics which if you don't pay heed and attention to them, you'll never be able to do it. But you struggle like fury to do it. It's all about cueing. There are certain aspects of the game, such as temperament, dedication, aptitude, and all the rest, which is beyond a coach. A coach doesn't teach you to be a champion. I've had lovely old boys of 80 come to me who have been playing all their lives, and they are still getting pleasure. So it isn't about just making champions. It's about making people understand so that every time they go and play, they get a heck of a lot of fun and pleasure. Well, you might wonder why I'm holding this ball. Well, let me tell you that this is the villain of the piece. To hit that ball in the centre is probably the hardest thing to do on a snooker table. Now, just let me explain to you some of the mystique of this game is surrounded on this ball. Now, if you see that small spot there, and I'm deliberately using a billiard spot ball here because it gives you an indication of the sort of accuracy that you must have when you're striking this cue ball. As you can see, the tip overlaps that by quite a considerable amount. So you have to be extremely accurate. Now, just let me explain, before we get too involved, that for every shot that you play on a snooker table, or billiard table, call it what you will, for every shot, there is only one line of aim. Whether it's a swerve shot, a straight shot, an angled shot, of any dimensions, there is one line of aim only. And if you fail to send this cue ball on that line of aim, you won't achieve what you can see ought to be done through your eyes, optically. So therefore, the striking of this cue ball is terribly accurate for one good reason, and it's this: that if I'm playing, shall we say, to pot that red in the centre pocket there, if I strike through the centre of this ball perfectly, and again, bear in mind, we're not talking about how any particular professional plays at all. We're talking about perfection. We're all trying to achieve perfection, no less. Of course, we don't all achieve it, any of us really achieve it for any long period of time, just a short time. So, if I strike left of centre inadvertently, that will push this cue ball marginally to the right. If I strike right of centre, it will push it marginally to the left, so that instead of taking the line straight through the centre of the cue ball, the centre of the object ball, into the pocket, I might, at some point, as I come through this line, I tweak on my butt, as I like to call it, on the butt of the cue, and you pull the cue accidentally one way or the other, and the cue ball is pushed, and you get the wrong contact, which is equally, if not more, accurate than you have to be on this one. So therefore you miss the pot and you say, goodness me, what happened? Now, the greater the distance between the balls, so the error that you make is magnified over that distance. So therefore, how many times do you hear people say, oh, but he's weak on the long shots? Well, of course he is, because there's less margin of error for the long shots. When you're close, there is more scope to play. For instance, when you're playing this pot from here, the margin of error from there to there isn't exaggerated quite so much, so you're more likely to get in the pocket. If you imagine now there's 10 feet, the length of the table, obviously the margin of error increases as you go forward and you miss the pot. So that is the first lesson to learn. You have to be able to strike the cue ball in the centre. At the moment we're not concerned with side, but we'll come to that later. Now, just to give yourself, when you're in your club and you have 5 minutes to practice and you want to give yourself a little idea of how well you're doing, how well you can cue, I'll just show you a little exercise where you can put yourself to the test. Now, this shot that you see behind me is an exercise that I think will help you in your cueing. Now, you know that generally it's accepted that players will hit the ball up and down over the spots when they're trying to see if they're cueing and hitting the ball centrally. Well, you know, there is one factor that is missed out in that sort of exercise, and it is the fact that in every shot that you play, you should be looking at the object ball when you strike the cue ball. And therefore, when you're hitting the ball up and down over the spots, to prove to yourself that you're hitting it in the middle, you'll generally play the shot and strike the cue ball in the centre and look at it when you strike it. Now, if you have a target, as you see on the table behind me, not only does it compel you to look at the target when you're cueing, but it also adds a lot of pressure, because the object of this exercise is to strike right through the balls and come back. But bearing in mind that this is the ultimate in the practice, obviously when you're doing this you start with just 2 balls, but now just let me go to the table and I'll just show you exactly what I mean. Well, there we are. Now, that is the ultimate shot. But then you don't have to start like that, because I can assure you that isn't quite as easy as it looks. So now, if Jason, would you kindly remove the centre balls for me and just leave the 2 at the top? So there we are. Now, that is how you start to practice. Just place the 2 balls in that position and just get down, and this will compel you to line up on the shot. And when you play, your eyes flick up to the object, push through, and back you come directly over the spots. Now, when I played that shot, I was actually looking at the point between the 2 balls, which is the correct way to aim. You always look at the object ball at the final moment of delivery. And that is a very useful little exercise. Feeling is something personal. You have to feel for yourself. And until you capture that feeling, you will struggle. So, I'll show you a little exercise where you can learn to feel the power of the cue and the feel of striking the ball correctly. So if we go to this end of the table, and you will see here that I've marked a position for the red ball, a little cross there, and I've marked, in this instance, 1, 2, 3, 4 little crosses. And we start on the first one, here. And the object here is not to pot a ball, but you want to get the feeling of power on the ball. So, you address the object ball just a little thicker than half ball and go through the usual procedure of addressing the cue ball where you mean to strike it and by pushing the cue straight through there, you screw in off the red into this pocket, which is a billiard shot, of course. But the point is, you will find that if you hang on to the butt too tightly, that you will do that sort of thing, which you mustn't do. And you will begin to feel the purpose of having a soft hold on the butt. Now, when you can do that quite a few times successively, and particularly the people who haven't got the wrist for the job. I mean, some players can do it quite naturally, youngsters can do it naturally, and some can't. So if you can't, this is your routine. So practice this until you can get that as often as you can, and then move to the next cross. Now, you will then look at it and realise that there has to be a little more in the shot, a little more power. So get down and play the shot, and this is what you will probably find will happen. You'll do something like that because you have put the same power into the shot, the feel, and this is what you're trying to capture. You'll put the same feel into that one as you did that one. So play it again and just dig a little deeper and take a little more push through with the cue there. And you find that it goes in. And play that a few times until you begin to feel the strength of the shot. Then come to this one, the third one. And again, this looks quite impossible when you're standing where I am. But again, keep the butt, although you've got the cushion holding you up a little, soft on the butt. And you notice I'm employing this bridge we were talking about here because it needs just a little more power. There. And I've totally missed the shot, and that's fair enough. So if you would return the ball, please. And we'll have another try. And this time, because I've had the feel of that one, I'm going to give it a little more, and there it is into the pocket. When you've practiced that, come to this one and do exactly the same thing. Now again here, don't try and screw the ball back. Try and develop the feel that you had before. And there you are, you've screwed the ball back. Now I can assure you, once you've got to that position, you can then push this ball a little further away and place your bridge hand on the table, and again we're into a little awkward bridge here. Screw back there, and the ball goes in the pocket. And that will save you all the problem of nudging and thrashing away at trying to make the ball come back. Let the cue do the work. You get into a club and get half a dozen fellows without any warning and just say to them, put the black on its spot like that, get the cue ball and say, Bill, Joe, John, Fred, put the ball on the black for me, so I'm nicely on the black. And what will they do? They'll all come and do that. Say, there you are. And they'll put you on a straight line. And immediately you're on a straight line, you can only do one thing. You can go forward or you can go back. So you see your position play is completely limited. And that is the whole secret of this game, to get the correct angle. Perhaps there is one other subject in this game that I don't think is discussed enough, and that's the etiquette of the game. And you know, I watch so many people playing in clubs, and whilst they don't mean to employ some of the tactics that do in fact happen, they do them unwittingly. And for instance, you see a fellow playing in a club and he chalks his cue and he plonks it down on the table and he walks away and he leaves the cue, the chalk on the table. Well, apart from being dusty and making dust on the cushion rails, it's very distracting. It's very distracting to a player. And if you take the the spotting of the balls. Very often you will see players not only spotting badly, but they tend to throw the balls, and that is sacrilege. You should never do that, for the simple reason that if you do that, you create a bruise on the table. You just watch this, and I'm not spoiling the cloth, but I'm not doing it any good by saying this. There. Now just look at this. Can you see that? Just look at that. That's like a little hole in the cloth almost. And that can very often spoil your intentions in a break or whatever if it nestles down there and rocks back into the... So never do it. And of course, if you do that constantly on a spot, in that fashion, even as gently as that, you will find that in no time at all, you're wearing out the cloth, and then you complain that the table isn't any good and so on. So remember, when you spot balls, go to the spot and slide it on with your finger. And that will solve all the problems. Another thing is, snooker players, when they're playing, if they inadvertently stand in the line of the player. If a player's playing into this corner pocket, stand back and give him view. I mean, you must see the referees. Try and be like a referee. They are a marvellous example. The best referees are never hardly seen. They get out of the way.